stuck in the book of John. It might seem that way to some of you, but we're slowly progressing through it, and we're digesting it in bits and pieces at a time. I hope it's rewarding to you as it is to me. It's really kind of a glorious book. And this is our 8th lesson in the book of John. Last week we looked at verses 129, John 129 to 42, and that was day 2 and 3 of the narrative in the book of John as he puts them on the next day and then the next day, so we kind of count the days and they're consecutively. And part of that, we looked at, considered John the Baptist's ministry, the baptism of Jesus himself, John's witness, and the discussion of any pre-baptism engagement between the two of them, right? So it's pretty limited in what we found there. But in essence, they certainly knew each other in the womb, you might say. But then there doesn't seem to be any more interaction between the two of them until they're on the scene at this baptism. So, purpose of John's baptism, we also talked about, remember, he identified Jesus as the Lamb of God and how significant that was, even though it's the only time it's expressed in the Bible itself, the Lamb of God. We never hear it again other than in this first chapter of John. But it's significant. We know what it means, basically, just because of the, we can look back to the sacrificial system and so forth, and the things that happened in the Old Testament. Genesis chapter 3, God provided skins for Adam and Eve to wear and so forth. We looked at the purpose of John's baptism was really not specifically for baptism purposes, but it was really to reveal Christ to Israel, was what the main purpose was. We looked at how with John's baptism, St. John the evangelist, the gospel writer, how his rendition of the baptism of Jesus was different than the others in the sense of what he wanted to focus on. So we looked at, in all the other gospels, the synoptic ones, the Matthew, Mark, and Luke, we looked, and we saw that there it was kind of a different, they had the same information, basically they were looking at different things. So you could see, for instance, the dove coming down and so forth like that. But in John, in the Gospel of John, it was more like John the Baptist was just reporting on what he saw. Okay, we looked at the idea that John the Baptist was that last prophet of the Old Testament era. He was like Moses coming right up to the promised land, but never got into it. Just kind of ceased right there. Justin and Devaney, Stephanie, I'm sorry. Hey, you can sit right there. Okay, thanks. So anyway, and then we also talked about what a disciple was. Remember what a disciple was? What was the what term do we get in for disciple? Remember that?
Learner, disciple, or
you're all mathematicians, okay? If you're a disciple, discipuli in the Latin, I guess, but essentially it was mathetes or something like that. So we get the math portion in there. So math means you're a learner, is basically what that means. Okay. All right. We looked at the idea of that. John the Baptist, this is where he encouraged his first 2 disciples, Andrew and St. John, to leave John the Baptist's ministry for Jesus, to go ahead and go over to Jesus' side. And we looked at the idea of that they stayed. Remember, they asked Jesus, "Where are you staying?" And that word "staying" is it's a term used by John in a number of different ways, but it was like resided and rested and abided, and all that language was the same word, and John uses that a lot in his gospel, but it all dwells in that sense. In fact, the word dwell itself is that same word. So it's part of the significant set of words that John uses to convey meaning and thought to his gospel. All right, and then we talked about Andrew and his reaction to then tell his brother Simon, and then after that it was we talked about, remember, Jesus and Simon meeting, and Jesus basically looked at him, he gazed at him and said, "You're going to be called Peter." Okay, you could kind of see through him. So that's where we stopped, and we'll go on. Are you ready to read?
Sure.
All right, just go ahead and give me John 1:43 to 51.
Got it.
That's a long one.
The next day, Jesus decided to go to Galilee. He found Philip and said to him, "Follow me." Now Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. Philip found Nathanael and said to him, "We have found him of whom Moses in the law and all the prophets wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." Nathanael said to him, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" Philip said to him, "Come and see." Jesus saw Nathanael coming toward him and said to him, or said of him, "Behold, an Israelite indeed, in whom there is no deceit." Nathanael said to him, "How do you know me?" Jesus answered him, "Before Philip called you, when you were under the fig tree, I saw you." Nathanael answered him, "Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel." Jesus answered him, "Because I said to you, I saw you under the fig tree, do you believe? You will see greater things than these." And he said to him, "Truly, truly, I say to you, you will see heaven open, and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man."
Thank you. A lot in here. We're going to try and get through it, but I think we'll just make it, just stop at the very last section here, but we'll see. Okay, so we're on the, starts off with the next day, right? So there's another consecutive day in here, and it's basically kind of day 4. And the way that I look at this real simply is to sort of see day 1 was kind of the Inquisition. Okay, when they came up to John, remember the Jews, what are you baptizing for, right? What's your business, kind of like? That was an inquired Inquisition by the Jews. And then day 2, this was where John the Baptist, like abbreviate that JTB, he says basically, "Behold the Lamb of God." Nothing else happened, but he just identifies Jesus, okay? So, behold. Then day 3, that was what we looked at last week. That was where another "Behold the Lamb of God." And this is where Andrew and John, I'm going to call him St. John, okay, just to make it easy to understand. These are the 2 guys, the 2 disciples that he's going to peel off. They're going to go now with Jesus. And what's going to happen is Andrew's going to tell who? Remember? Say it again? Peter, exactly right. Okay, so maybe that's probably on the same day. I mean, we're guessing that doesn't explicitly say, okay? But certainly we're on the day 4 now. And here it gets a little tenuous as to really where we are, when, and so forth like that, because it says now on the 4th day they went to Galilee. Is that what it says? Decided to go to Galilee. It's hard to say whether they actually we don't know the details. Were they in process and so forth like that? So we just have some ambiguity in the text here about things. But the point is that we want to ask, okay, why did all of a sudden they break to go up to Galilee? What was the point about that? Anybody have any clue? Any thoughts? Seafood? Okay, that's a good answer. You like the cuisine down in Judea? Certainly. Okay, there's always good reasons. Well, I think probably likelihood is, he's finished what he needs to do in Judea, and he wants to now build the ministry, what he wants to do up in Galilee, because that's where he's going to focus all of his efforts right now. And so he's got a few of his disciples that we've seen, so he's going to build his team, basically start up there that process. And so we're now beginning to get into full swing of things as we go along here. So it says, the next day Jesus decided to go to Galilee. He found Philip and said to him, "Follow me." Okay, so that's all. It's very brief interaction there. There's no response from Philip or anything like that. It's just "follow me," and sometimes John, for brevity's sake and all, he's not going to go into any of the details, any of the discourse and engagement. It's just simply more like just as brief as I can make this. Follow me, and then Philip just is obedient to it. It says that Philip was from Bethsaida, and that was the city of Andrew and Peter. So I think we can basically get the idea. These guys knew each other. There's no question about that. It's certainly clear in basically the interactions that go on here. It doesn't say that they left Galilee, where they landed in Galilee, where it came through. And so it's hard, they could have gone to Bethsaida. The issue there is Bethsaida is way up on the northeast side of Galilee, the Sea of Galilee. And that would make the trek potentially upwards of 75 miles. That is a long way. They do not have bullet trains or anything like that. They're going to buses and so forth to get on. They're hoofing it, okay? And so, again, the next day and so forth like that, I'm not exactly sure if we're missing a little bit of the details on things and so forth. or where exactly they got into Galilee and all. So I don't know. We just have to live with some of the ambiguity and just say, okay, we don't know all things. It's not that it's incorrect. We just don't have all the details. You know? So anyway, so they were grouped together basically, and the other thing is possible that even though Andrew and these guys were brothers here, and we don't actually have the information, it is possible, just again from a little bit of ambiguity earlier in the chapter that we didn't dwell on last time, but John could have also brought his brother James. James and John were brothers. It's just possible they were all just down there at the same time hearing about John the Baptist's ministry and wanting to see this Jesus person and so forth. So we don't have that explicitly said, but we can see that just simply in a lot of ways from the listing of the disciples in the Synoptic Gospels, we can sort of see this pop out. And we'll look at that a short bit later. Okay, so, well, I'll say it right now. All the Synoptics have, and if you look at Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the Synoptic Gospels, all of them have Peter as first. Then we have Andrew, James, John, Philip, and Bartholomew. Okay, those are the first six. That's how it's stated. Then you have the others in a little bit of a sorted mix in the way that they're stated. But you can see those six are always the order in which they're listed. So you find the sort of James and John next to each other. And we're going to discuss this Philip and Bartholomew in just a minute. Okay, so Philip is an interesting character. We find that in John chapter 6, for instance, and Devaney, are you going to read for us? John chapter 6, Jesus is going to test him, and we're going to find out what's he going to ask him. So go ahead and read verses 5 through 7.
Lifting up his eyes, then seeing a large crowd was coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread so that these people may eat?" He said this to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread would not be enough of each of them to get a living.
So, this is at what event? Feeding the 5,000. And Philip is like, I don't know. Where are we going to get this, bread stuff here? So Philip was just sort of at his wit's end, is what we're sort of seeing here. Okay. The second event, and John, if you want to read John 14:8-9.
Philip said, "Lord, show us the Father, and that will be enough for us." Jesus answered, "Don't you know me, Philip? Even after I have been among you such a long time, anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, show us the Father?"
So we just had these two little instances of engagement with Philip to basically kind of look at and see what his character was kind of like, And we can't judge him for things that we don't know elsewhere about, but it just shows us, this is the kind of people that the Lord entrusted his ministry with. And it's just amazing because, Philip would not have been voted most likely to succeed in his class, is what I'm getting at. He wasn't the most driven, most ambitious, and so forth like that, but he was certainly one who was trustworthy and who would basically minister the gospel to others. There's no question about that. But, he was not the star pupil by any means, but it's just amazing that the Lord uses any of us, right? So that's a blessing there. But there are, what we might see is kind of a discrepancy in looking at it. So I just want to look at it just to make sure that if you see this, you read this, that it's like, really, wow, what's going on here? Because it does seem quite different. We look at Matthew 4:18-22. You feel like reading that? Bill?
While walking by the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers.
This is, by the way, this is Jesus walking here. Okay.
Okay, he saw two brothers, Simon, who is called Peter, and Andrew, his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And he said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." Immediately they left their nets and followed him. And going on from there, he saw two other brothers, James the son of Zebedee and John his brother, in the boat with Zebedee their father, mending their nets, and he called them. Immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him.
Okay. Do you see any kind of differences between what we just read in Matthew and what we have been reading in John? Does it seem different? I mean, Jesus was down in Judea when he was with John, when these guys were called, and now where is he? Sea of Galilee. Quite a bit of, now we got a difference here, right? Pretty striking. And then he says, follow me, but it was John who had introduced, John the Baptist who had introduced them. So there's a lot of difference, really, technically, when you look at it between this account and between the Matthew account and what John's account was as far as these disciples. And the question might be, well, how do we reconcile them? Why can they be so different, right? I mean, we ought to be able to have an answer like that, because people can say, the Bible's full of errors, right? We're not providing, I guess the answer there, we're really not providing all of the exhaustive details about what's going on in these accounts. I think the way that we can kind of rationalize it or talk about it is that the idea that Jesus, he met them in Judea. I think that's kind of crystal clear. But he's going to bring them up into Galilee. And remember, that's where they lived, and also at some point, Jesus may break off from them for maybe a week or two or some set of time, and he's going to go ahead and find his other disciples. But in the meantime, they can do their preparatory work for basically leaving what their occupation was, turning it over to their father and so forth like that, and so they can plan to go ahead and be with Jesus in his ministry there. So he comes back and does this final roundup of all of his other disciples whom he had left off earlier in Galilee. Does that make kind of sense?
It's always puzzling me a little bit, the immediately part. Do it down.
Yeah.
Because, immediately that's gotten people, including myself, in trouble with that, thinking you followed somebody for some reason.
Right.
Without.
Right, just kind of like a robot and just
Yeah.
Yeah, I think in this case, it makes sense only in the way that I said it, that they had made the preparation for it. So immediately made me, doesn't mean like, good night, I'm just going to drop, I'm carrying a baby, I'm just going to drop it, that sort of idea that it's just, I'm going to take care of things quickly, you might say. It's not going to take me very long. I'm all prepped up for it. I've just got to go ahead and lock the door and leave, so to speak. So, yeah. All right, any other questions or comments on that? All right, so our next verse, and it says, Philip found Nathanael and said to him, we have found him of whom Moses in the law and also the prophets wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph. So this is verse 45, which we had read earlier. So the idea, again, we talked about Philip just for a few minutes earlier, but the idea that Philip, remember, they're traveling as a band, as a group, as a troop, you might say. And so they're all chatting with each other and giving each other their knowledge of things. And
Sorry.
Silence.
I thought I did.
Okay, that's it. Anyway, so they're traveling along, and then Philip is going to go ahead, and it says he finds Nathanael. Okay, now it's not Nathaniel, it's Nathanael. If you really want to, but anyway.
Yeah.
If you say Nathaniel and I say Nathaniel, I'm not going to have any heart for it. Okay, so, but it says that he found Nathanael, and it says to him, we have found him of whom Moses and the law and also the prophets wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph. There is, by the way, just the word we have, you're going to find, you're going to find the word found and find and follow just sprinkled throughout this entire chapter, okay? So, for instance, just want to show you. It says in verse 37, John the Baptist, he first points Andrew and John to Jesus. And then it says Andrew and John follow Jesus. And then it says Andrew found his own brother Simon. And then Andrew tells Simon, we have found the Messiah. And then Jesus found Philip and says, follow me. And now Philip found Nathanael. So it's interesting, it's just this continuation of this chain, you might say, of going on. It's a chain of evangelism when you get down to it. It's interesting, when we look at this next guy, we looked at Philip, now we're looking at Nathanael. And this, he's only mentioned here and in John chapter 20. We'll look at that, 21, we'll look at that momentarily. But the idea is, his name is not mentioned in any of the listings of the disciples, of the 12. So who is this guy? And we have most, I'm not an expert in this, but the commentaries basically say Nathanael is essentially Bartholomew. When you see that, because you generally see them coupled together in the list of the listing of the 12, Philip and Bartholomew. So in this case, it was Philip, talked to Nathanael. and that was who he wanted to bring to Christ. And so the connection is that Nathanael is Bartholomew. And the reason why it seems like a sort of funky name there is because Bartholomew, it's what they call a patronymic name, meaning it's based on the father itself. So it'd be like the bar, when you say, you know, Jesus bar Jonah or whatever, something like that, you're saying the son of somebody, son of Jonah. In this case, Bartholomew is the son of Tholomew, Bartholomew. So it's just how they termed him. So it's very likely that Nathanael is Bartholomew. Okay. And then Philip's testimony to Nathanael is, he says, we have met the object of Old Testament prophecy, right? He says, the one whom Moses speaks about in the law. Who would that be? We talked about him on earlier lessons. Who was Moses referring to? Do you remember that figure from the Old Testament?
Hosea?
Say again? Well,
The serpent and the...
no, not the figure. It was the prophet, exactly, from Deuteronomy 18. Moses says to the Israelites, God will raise up among you a prophet like me, basically. So he's referring to this mysterious figure that nobody seems to know anything about, but he's something to do with the end, something to do with messianic kind of idea to it. That's all that we knew about it. And he says also that the prophets wrote. Now, we talked about prophets, we're talking about these guys like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Daniel, and all these other ones that have clear prophetic visions and so forth of the end times and associated with messianic kind of things. Okay, so Philip is telling us now, this is the guy who's in the Old Testament. Okay, this is him, and so he wants him to know about it. And we understand these guys were not scribes; they were not seminary educated people, but certainly, as you grew up in their culture and all, you were inculcated with the truths of the scriptures. You know, you were taught it, you've learned it, and you may not be an expert at it, but certainly you knew the basics of the Old Testament for certain. But his minds were open. His mind was open. Their minds about who Jesus was, at least in a rudimentary sense. Nowhere in a full, comprehensive idea there. But it's interesting, Philip addresses Nathanael, he says, we. He doesn't say I, he says, we have found this guy, right? So the idea there is that he's got his group with him. He's got Andrew and Simon and John, maybe James and so forth like that. So it's a collective that is with him at this time. And it's like, again, that they all knew each other. And then he says, he addresses who Jesus, he says, calls him Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph. So when he says this, identifies this person as Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph, he's basically giving them the three pieces of information that you need to identify someone. First of all, their name, right, Jesus, and then where he's from, okay, which was what, Nazareth, right? Yeah. And then whose kid was he, right? Whose son was he? Essentially, is what they were doing. So he identifies them the three key pieces, and so that's critical for him. And so here we are. So, question is, why didn't he say Jesus of Bethlehem?
He may not have even realized.
Yeah, right, exactly right, Cindy. I mean, yeah, he could have mentioned it per se, but that, you spend your life, in a town like where you were raised up in there, that's where you're from. Despite where you're technically born, that's where you say you.
And would he even have known that? Because
good question there too. Good question there. He didn't necessarily know all the details, and I think it's kind of interesting because there's a couple of things when we talk about it. He identified him as the son of Joseph. Was Jesus the son of Joseph?
no.
No, he was not. That is correct. Whose son was he?
The Holy Spirit.
God, right? So this is kind of a little bit of a problem, but again, it's just speaking in a very natural sense of how you would identify somebody. I think it's just sort of, it's kind of an honest, you might say, mistake in essence, or how would you identify somebody? Oh yeah, he's the son of God. We got here. Basically he's the son because he was raised by Joseph. Joseph presumably has passed away. Don't know when, any details on that, but he's certainly out of the picture from when Jesus was, a boy at 12 years old there.
Yeah, but they fix it in verse 49.
Say that again?
But he fixes it in verse 49.
Okay, hang on to that. Thank you. Okay. But it's not him that fixes it, but Nathanael, right? Okay, yeah, right. So anyway, so he should have said, the son of Mary, but that really, I don't think culturally was the best way to present things, and that way you did things by the father. Ours was a patriarchal system. And he, like he said, he wouldn't have understood the kind of the whole pre-existence about who he was in his divine sense. I mean, this was just going to begin to dawn on him, so that we couldn't have any expectations of them to know this stuff. So, but in fact, this earthly biological identification of Jesus as the son of Joseph was used against him by the Jews. And let's look at John 6:42. Who's next? Dale?
They said, "Is not this Jesus, the son of Joseph, whose father and mother we know? How does he now say, I have come down from heaven?"
Okay. So you see the little slander there, the son of Joseph in there, so you're just the son of Joseph. You're just a human being like the rest of us, kind of a thing, So, but sometimes John, he's going to keep, and sometimes the gospel, the writers of the Bible, they're going to capture what somebody says, whether it's right or wrong. They're just going to keep it. Just when there's an errant statement, it'll be, that it's wrong later on, but this is how people live. This is how they understand it, and so he's going to capture it in that sense. So he knew Philip's statement. Philip's statement was not an intent to deny the virgin birth, is what I'm getting at. Okay, it just was how they would have understood it at the time. All right, so the next line is, Nathanael said to him, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" And Philip said to him, "Come and see." So we're told by John at the end of the gospel where Nathanael's home was here. And in John 20, so let's see where Nathanael was. Let's see, John 21, 1-2, if you don't mind reading that, Cindy.
Afterward, Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Tiberias. It happened this day, Simon Peter, Thomas, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other disciples were together.
Right. So this identifies where Nathanael was from Cana in Galilee. So it's just a connection with him again. He's one of the Galileans. And Cana was not a huge town in itself. Thing was, it was undoubtedly bigger than Nazareth, okay? And this is where you get into kind of the rivalry of, sometimes you might say, of just between towns, So if you look at the totem pole of respectability, you got, if you're in Jerusalem, you're a Judean, you're kind of at the top, and you're looking down at anybody who is, elsewhere in the nation. And certainly Cana is not too far off the bottom, but Nazareth probably way down near the bottom. So it'd be like, how can the Messiah come out of such a podunk town like Nazareth? It doesn't. It's like saying he's coming out of Niederwald or something like that. So it was striking to them that something like that could ever be. And so Nazareth is about 10 miles south of Cana. It wasn't very far distance-wise, but again, it was just sort of an insignificant town. And we look back at that question about why didn't he say he was from Bethlehem? And I think it was kind of, Jesus could have really, mentioned that and could have drawn attention to it, but because this would have drawn the understanding of his Davidic lines, the overtones that he was from the lineage of David, right? But when you get down to it, it's probably part of the intentional self-abasement of Jesus, not to necessarily draw attention to himself when he doesn't want it, when it's not meant for purposes that are not suitable for his ministry. So we look at, for instance, Isaiah 53, 1-3, if you wouldn't mind, I guess that's you, Cheryl.
Who has believed what he has heard from us, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he grew up before him like a young plant, and like a root out of dry ground. He had no form or majesty that we should look at him, and no beauty that we should desire him. He is despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief.
Right. So you get this idea that when he's going to come on the scene, you're not going to be attracted by him like some sort of a movie star or anything like that. He's just going to be somebody you don't even care about, roughly, and that's sort of the idea here. That no beauty that we should desire him. I mean, good night, the guy's from Nazareth. What did you expect, sort of a thing. And then even years after Christ had died, Paul, who's in front of Felix, he's battling the Jewish spokesman Tertullus at Paul's trial, continues with this disparaging remark about Nazareth, Acts 24:5. Eric, do you feel like reading that if you've got it?
For we have found this man a plug, one who stirs up trials among all of the Jews throughout the world, and is leader of the sect of the Nazarenes.
Okay, remember the sect of the Nazarenes. So it's like a disparaging remark. Okay, I want to ask your parents. Would you care to read? Would you want to do that? I want to do that. Okay, all right. We got ready in just a minute. Okay, so again, it was just sort of would have been offensive to Nathanael just to think that Messiah would come from an insignificant town like Nazareth. It just didn't make sense to him. So, but Nathanael doesn't sit there, and Philip doesn't sit there and argue with him. Okay, what does he say to Nathanael?
Come and see.
Just come and see. Okay, you get the idea of like, okay, I'm not going to fight against it. There, just come, just see. Yeah.
I have a question. Where does the Nazarite vow come from? Or, because wasn't Samson under the Nazarite thing, and John essentially was...
I don't
Is
know if
that-
there was a connection with Nazareth or not. That's a good question. I really don't know. That's a good question. That's your homework. Okay. So it was sort of like the ultimate in dealing with a skeptic, okay? Just come over and see for yourself, sort of like, if you don't believe me, just come and see. And that's one way to sort of to do it with people. And then it says in verse 47, Jesus saw Nathanael coming toward him and said of him, "Behold, an Israelite indeed, in whom there is no deceit." Okay? And so we saw back, remember back in verse 42, when Simon came into Jesus' presence, and then Simon renames him as Peter. In this case, it's sort of a similar situation where he's approaching him. Nathanael's approaching Jesus, and Jesus declares, "Behold, an Israelite indeed, in whom there is no deceit." Now, there's a lot of play on words here that we're going to look at in just a minute, just to make sure we kind of understand what is being said. But the idea there is Jesus, again, he's sort of showing his divine ability to sort of see into man, see what their character is like. And so we think we're going to go on from there. And Jesus, because what had he just done to Jesus' hometown? He just disparaged it, right? But Jesus doesn't say, "You little bigot, why would," kind of a thing. I mean, he says, where's your DEI program? You gotta understand here. So Jesus, he just dispensed with that and just took him as he was. At least he was thinking, Nathanael at least is being honest, okay, with what he's doing. At least he's open about it.
He's not talking behind his back.
Yeah, exactly.
He's just saying it.
Upfront about it, exactly.
If you go back to the thing about come and see, that should be something maybe that we tell people when we witness to them or something, because how many people, I think of different authors who were lawyers or whatever, and they said, "Oh, I don't believe this, I'm going to disprove it." So when they're disproving it, they actually came to Christ. And so it's like if you examine what is said about him,
Right. Yeah, exactly right. Exactly. I mean, it's wonderful to have his presence right there and then, but, we have the scriptures all the more certain that tell us the whole story. So it is an invite for those skeptics, yeah. So he says there's no deceit in him, and Jesus is not referencing Nathanael's his bloodline all the way back to Abraham and Jacob, who was Israel later on. We'll look at all this, but the point is there that he's looking at him as he has the right faith that is composes what Israel was supposed to be. And he says there's no deceit or guile. Okay, so there's a bit of a play on the description here. We'll look at that a bit here. We go to Genesis chapter, before we get on there, remember Genesis chapter 25, the story of the birth of Esau and Jacob. You remember that story? And somebody quickly tell me what the nature of that whole issue was. What happened when they were born?
They were twins.
They were twins. They were fraternal twins.
He was holding onto his heel.
Okay, so who was born first?
Esau.
Esau. So Jacob, when Esau is born, they notice that Jacob has his hand on Esau's heel, like he wants to supplant him, like he wants to take his place, like he wanted to be first, is really what the whole thing was. Okay, he was trying to catch him. And that was the whole thing. Jacob got his name. The name means heel catcher. And essentially it kind of lined up with sort of trying to be deceitful, cunning, crafty, trying to take over things that weren't yours to take, So, but he wanted, you might say, the birthright. Because the one who was born first, despite being twins, didn't matter. You got the birthright, okay? So you got the better inheritance and so forth like that, and inherited all the things that are associated with being the patriarchal kind of blessing. So at the end of the story, we remember later on that Esau comes in from hunting, and he's starving, and he says, because Esau is the hunter and Jacob is the one who does the farming and all, and so Esau said, give me your porridge, give me the lentils, okay? And Jacob says, sell me your birthright, give me I'll trade it for the birthright, And what does Esau do? He does it, okay? He's willing to do it, trade his birthright for just a bowl of pottage or porridge, and I think he says the Lord despised him for that, in a sense, because he counted as such an insignificant thing to trade it for. But later on, in Genesis 27, Isaac, their father, is also thinking himself dying, is tricked by Jacob and Rebekah to give him the patriarchal blessing. And do you remember that, when that whole scene there? So let's look at Genesis 27, 35 through 36.
But he said, your brother came deceitfully, and he has taken away your blessing. Esau said, is he not rightly named Jacob? For he has cheated me those 2 times. He took away my birthright, and behold, now he has taken away my blessing. Then he said, have you not reserved a blessing for me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so did Jacob take the birthright from him?
No.
Not really. I mean, he traded it technically, but Esau's obviously upset with the whole deal there. But then so Esau wants to then kill Jacob, and what does Rebekah do? She sends him off up north to Paddan Aram to get him away from Esau and get him away from the Canaanite women and so forth, and get a wife from up there. So Jacob basically he lives up to his name as this guy who lives by manipulation and deceiving people and all. But in the next 20 years, he's gonna live a life where he gets deceived upon and all by his uncle Laban and all. So it turns around. It's fair trade here, okay? So he's both the deceiver and the one being deceived. And after 20 years, he's going to return back down to the promised land. And he still has in the back of his mind who wants to kill him. Esau, his brother, okay? He is terrified of Esau. But he still has the promise of God that he's coming back, right? So it says in the next passage here, Genesis 32, where are we on? Over here? 3-8.
Jacob went, sorry. And Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau his brother in the land of Seir, the country of Edom, instructing them, thus you shall say to my lord Esau, thus says your servant Jacob, I have sojourned with Laban and stayed until now. I have oxen, donkeys, flocks, male servants and female servants. I have sent to tell my lord in order that I may find favor in your sight.
Okay, read that round down to verse 12.
So, all the way to 12?
Yeah.
Okay. And the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, we came to your brother Esau, and he is coming to meet you, and there are 400 men with him. Then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. He divided the people who were with him, and the flocks and the herds and the camels into 2 camps, thinking if Esau comes into one camp and attacks it, then the camp that is left will escape.
Stop there. Thank you. I'm sorry. Okay, so so it says Jacob was greatly afraid, right? And distressed. What's Esau coming at him with? 400 men. Well, that's like a little army there. So he's just all in a panic. Panicking. Anyway. Okay, so Jacob's going to pray and turn to God for guidance. And so he realizes basically it's out of his hands. I've got to depend upon God now. Okay. So we'll read his next prayer. I don't know, Sabina, are you willing to read? Do you care to read? Or up to you? And Genesis, let's see, 9 through 12. 32.
She just went up.
Share your name.
And Jacob said, O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, return to your country and to your kindred, that I might do you good.
I am not worthy of the least of all the deeds of steadfast love and all the faithfulness that you have shown to your servant. For with only my staff I crossed this Jordan, and now I have become 2 kings. Please deliver me from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, that he may come and attack me, the mothers with the children. But you said, I will surely do you good, and make your offspring as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude.
Do you see the change in Jacob here? All of a sudden he's suddenly very humble, and he's now fully reliant on God himself. The idea, I am not worthy. I fear this guy. And so that night, Jacob sends off his household. So he's left all alone by himself. And there's this mysterious figure that shows up on the scene, okay? And it's the weirdest event, okay? Jacob is going to wrestle with this person all night. We don't know anything about it. It's just weird. But the point is, it says that he shows up on the scene and he wrestles with him all night. The figure touches his hip socket and disjoints it. So he has to walk with a limp, kind of like, for the rest of his life. And it's a strange exchange. But Jacob clings to this person, and he will not let him go until he blesses him. It baffles me to say, okay, wait a minute. You just wrestled him. You don't want him around you, but now you're saying if you want to leave me, you got to bless me. It's just, I can't explain some of the cultural things there, but at any rate, the figure asks Jacob, "What is your name?" Jacob, perhaps in a bit of a shamed manner, says, "Jacob. My name is Jacob," and that meant I'm the deceiver. But it says. Then he said, the figure, your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel. For you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed. And somewhat challenging to understand maybe the full meaning of that thing with striven with God and men. But I think the idea there is that he's no longer going to be dependent upon his own strength and cunning, but he would be depending now on the Lord is really how I kind of understand that. And the hip socket disjointedness was to reflect that dependency. So when Jesus tells Nathanael, here's an Israelite in whom there is no deceit, he's like saying, here is an Israelite in whom there is no Jacobness, okay? There's no Jacob within you. And so he's just sort of a clear term of saying you have lacked the deceit, the cunning, the craftiness that Jacob had, who was the first Israelite person.
Do you know what the meaning of Israel is?
To be striven, to strive.
Strive,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. God, yeah. So even if Nathaniel makes Nazareth has this Nazareth prejudice, at least he's being honest in his thinking. So that was the whole point about that, some of that. And then Nathaniel says to him, how do you know me? How do you know this character about me? And he says to him, before Philip called you, what did he say? When you were under the fig tree, I saw you. Now, it doesn't seem to me like that's a big prophetic event, okay? And we don't know any details, but whatever it was, it struck Nathanael that this was significant. Maybe he hadn't been under a fig tree in ages, kind of thing, or something that was just so significant to him that this triggered something in him to know this guy, he had, supernatural awareness of something, because nobody else would have known this, okay? We don't know the details. It's all that we're left to. And so Jesus responds that, about the fig tree, and Nathanael then, so he basically removed all the doubts that Nathanael had. Nathanael answered him, Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel. Now, we've got a big jump here, okay, because Philip had just called him the son of Joseph, and what does Nathanael call him? The Son of God, okay? So we have now gone to go and collected our $200 because he has just made a momentous, statement here. But the idea there is, I don't think Nathanael was saying more than he knew, really. When they look at somebody who's saying this, somebody's the Son of God, we look at it in terms of probably more likely the way that we might use terminology ourselves. Like you might call somebody in a derogatory sense, it's actually euphemistic for something else, a son of a gun, okay, something like that. And you're calling because of a certain thing. Part of that is because you might say something like that because it was an unexpected thing happened. Okay, well, son of a gun, kind of a thing. But the idea is that you would also name somebody as son of something if you wanted to kind of characterize them without saying they were that thing. So, for instance, we look at Judas, who became the son of perdition, okay, because he was the one who was doomed, who was prophesied to be this person here, or a person who was a bad person, the son of wickedness, or something like that. So you might give them that title, the son of something, without declaring that they were that thing there. So that's how I think we can understand Nathanael's what he was saying there, son of God, in the sense he wasn't saying he was literally in the metaphysical sense the son of God, but just in the sense of you have the awareness, the knowledge, the supernatural, something about Godness is associated with you. Messiahship is really what it's getting at. Yeah.
Because then he adds on, you are the king of Israel.
Yeah.
And we said that.
That is our next item there, and that he is probably, it's a messianic kind of terminology here. And that's a good point because he's going to say that, and that's going to be used a couple more times in John's gospel. But Jesus is going to basically try and steer away from that language, in essence, because he doesn't, it's too colored. It has too much political ramifications and meaning to it that he doesn't want it associated with what his ministry is. So he will not use that terminology, I'm the king of Israel and so forth like that. They'll put it on top of the cross, king of the Jews and so forth, but he is not going to adopt that term for himself. He doesn't do that, even though he certainly could and would, but that's not what his intention is in order to have you understand what his mission is. Instead, he's going to declare himself as something else.
Quick
Yeah.
question. Where in the Bible does the angel change Jacob's name?
Oh, that wasn't, we read that, that was not, yeah. When we say an angel, really, what we're saying, Cheryl, this figure that we mentioned,
Okay.
He's like the angel of the Lord. It really appears to be Jesus himself in it's called a theophany, a pre-incarnate appearance. That's how it's sort of understood by Bible experts.
And where was it?
That was over in Genesis 32:28. Yeah. Did we
Thank
not
you.
say that? Did we not?
You read
Oh, okay,
it.
okay, thank you, okay, all right. And so he doesn't want to adopt that term to the king just because of the political connotations that would go with it. And because obviously you've got all the Roman, that they were under service to and so forth, so he wants to keep it clean and not have that with him. But it is a messianic term, and it is a recognition that he is clearly Messiah, although I don't think they fully understood everything that was involved with that. So he doesn't want to be seen as a political liberator, is what I'm getting at. So, and then it says, Jesus answered him, because I said to you, I saw you under the fig tree, do you believe? And this is kind of like, you will see greater things than that. And I look at this as like Jesus is sort of like amazed that the credulity of Nathanael, that all I said, you were under the fig tree and you're going to call me the Messiah? It's kind of like, wow, that's pretty easy, pretty easy win over there. And I never watched the Chosen. Who's watched the Chosen in here? Okay, probably a good portion of you then. And I know they show Jesus as, probably a very personable type of person who's laughs a lot and jolly, and and I'm sure Jesus was not just frowning all the time like a Debbie Downer kind of a person, but the idea was that he was serious about his mission. So I think that there's not much way. We'll look at the wedding in Cana next week probably, but the idea there is, I'm sure there was joy there and laughter and all, but there was not much joy to his mission, what he was going to do. So you're not going to find him laughing. It never records Jesus laughing in the scriptures. It says that he wept for sure, but we're never recorded that he laughed. I could hear him laugh here. Okay, you're going to say, all I need to say is, I saw you sitting under the fig tree. That's all I could hear a chuckle there. Okay, but beyond that, I don't know. We can say he ever laughed, in a hard manner that we would think about, other than maybe the wedding in Cana and so forth. So anyway, but it was a miracle of knowledge, and the idea there is, miracles that are belief based on miracles can be spurious. So that's why we have the scriptures, we have the more sure word about what we believe rather than a miracle, which obviously is a very important facet of what John's gospel. These were the signs that he used to testify, to show that Jesus was the Messiah. But certainly we don't look for miracles in our lives. We look to the scriptures to testify about who Jesus is. Okay. All right, so he says then that Jesus promised that he would see greater things than these, meaning more certain and convincing proofs. And he goes back again to this, to the Israelite thing that was back with Jacob. He says, "From truly, truly." Okay. Now this word, the truly, truly, is the double amen in Greek. John is the only gospel writer who uses it. 25 times he will use this word. Okay, and it means it's an emphatic. This is true. You can believe this utterance that I'm telling you. This is beyond, equivocating on. This is going to happen. And he says, truly, truly, I say to you. Now he's going to direct not just to Nathanael, he's telling them all. So this is a plural form of you. So he's telling, I'm truly, truly, y'all, listen here, okay? You will see heaven open, and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man. So again, this idea of this ascending and descending, this goes right back to the story, back to Jacob again, back in Genesis. We'll look at that here in just a second. And it goes back to the dream that he had. This is when he fled from Esau, when he was going up to Paddan Aram to get away from Esau, and he's in this. He stops in this place to take a rest, to take a night of sleep, and we're going to look at Genesis 28, 10 through 17. It's a long one. Who's next? When do you care? Okay.
Jacob left Beersheba and went toward Haran, and he came to a certain place and stayed there that night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones of the place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place to sleep. And he dreamed, and behold, there was a ladder set up on the earth, and at the top, and it reached to heaven. And behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie I will give to you and to your offspring. Your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east, and to the north and to the south. And in you and your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Behold, I am with you, and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. Then Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. And he was afraid and said, How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven.
So the issue that we want to look at here is he had this dream, and in the dream he sees angels who are ascending and descending up to heaven from the earth on this ladder, right? And the interpretations of what this means are manifold, okay? It's hard to really understand exactly what it means. It's like you can kind of distill maybe what some of them were, but it seems to be the way that it's visually communicating to Jacob that God is providentially aware of all things by this knowledge. The angels are leaving the earth, going up to heaven, giving this information and all to God himself. Obviously doesn't need it, but there's a picture there. And he's to bring him his awareness of all things and ensuring that God is watching over him to bring all things to pass that he has ordained. So these angels descending down, they basically cause these things to happen that God has ordained. Again, it's hard to really understand fully what this dream is about. But Jesus refers to this dream when he talks to Nathanael and the group about you're going to see heaven open and see what this means. And the idea there is that he's referring again back to the Abrahamic covenant that all the families of the earth will be blessed as part of what we read in Genesis there. And he's essentially saying that with the idea of heaven being open, it's the idea of exposing that you are going to see the glories of what nobody else had ever seen about of the truth about God. He's going to be exposed in what Christ is going to be. Remember, he said, he who has seen me has seen the Father, basically. He's going to break into our reality truths that were never known before, and he's going to expose these things to us, okay? That's really what he's getting at. We're pretty much finished for the day. And I wanted to do the last verse. You will see them. It'll be on what's called the Son of Man. We have to save that for next week. That's a topic in itself. That's very important. That's why he never refers to himself as the king of somebody, but he always talks to himself in this third person as the Son of Man. And that's really critical that we understand what that term means. So we'll look at that next week along with the Cana wedding. Any comments, questions, thoughts? Well, you've been fantastic. So let me pray us out. Lord God, thank you so much.